Well, hey everyone, my guest today is Ian Sheppard. Ian is an outback tour guide with Great Divide Tours, and he's also an off-road training instructor. And I thought, Ian, you'd make an excellent guest on this podcast, and we can talk about life and living to the full and squeezing the most out of both your vehicle and your holidays. So welcome to the program.
No, thanks very much. Happy to be here.
Well, let's talk about training instruction just for a minute. Who do you train in four-wheel drive and off-road driving?
It's quite a variety of people, ranging from the Army, Navy, Air Force, so our fighting men and women in the Defence Forces, through to the Federal Police, a lot of the people like Snowy Hydros, any sort of corporation that requires their people to drive off-road. And then, of course, there's all the mums and dads as well, just wanting to go out and have their trip of a lifetime, but do it safely. So there's a lot of those that come through the centre.
Okay, there's a centre. Do people come to you for the instruction?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, we've got a 240-acre property down in Braidwood, which is it's got about 12 to 15k of tracks on it, all absolutely purpose-built for the sole purpose of training.
Okay, so I imagine you got some steep hills, you got some boggy bits, you got some water. What else have you got to make things interesting?
There's all that. There's some really deep sort of moguls as well to simulate some very deep holes in some of the tracks. Yes, water crossings, bog holes, skid pans, some very, very steep downhill sections, some good rock climbing sections. Lots of log steps as well. So there's all sorts of things there, as well as a really good facility for the actual theoretical part, which we spend quite a bit of time sitting in a classroom basically, and hopefully making it interesting.
How long does it take for someone to be properly instructed? What courses do you provide?
They're all 2-day courses. For the mums and dads, that is, it's a 2-day course. And it can be fully accredited as well, so nationally recognised. We do that for a lot of the corporate guys, and we tailor make a lot of the courses too for specifically for the Army, Navy, Air Force. They want specific things, so we can do exactly what they need. But 2 days is the average length of time, and there's 2 courses that we basically offer. Actually, 3, I should say. There's the beginner course, the advanced course, and then for those that have camper trailers, we do offer a specific day course tacked on to the end of the normal course for the trailers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a big fan of the outdoors, but I must confess, I've never really driven a four-wheel drive. The only time I have is on the highway. I was driving somebody else's car. I've never owned one. The most off-road I've done is probably in a rental car in New Zealand sometime.
Yep.
So, I'm asking questions as a complete dummy, so be patient with me, but I'm sure many people listening to this, they're not four-wheel car owners either. So let's just keep it interesting, and let's talk about adventuring this great country of Australia, which has got four-wheel drive tracks and off-road paths crisscrossing the nation from top to bottom and left to right. Tell us about some of the more exotic trails that you're involved in.
There's a few of the sort of the classic ones, like Cape York. That's a real adventure. We start off in Cairns and wind our way up through some very, very interesting backcountry, through rainforests, through some magnificent beaches, some very, very hectic river crossings that, unfortunately have seen a few cars go swimming, which is never a good thing.
Yep.
So there's all sorts of variety up there, and so many things to see, from a lot of the old goldfields right up to the north end, where there's lots of the old World War II bunkers where the US was based, and there's quite a few plane wrecks and things up there as well. But then there's also the other extreme, which is out through the Simpson Desert area. And my favourite trip is up through the Madigan line, which is on the northern end of the Simpson. And it's basically, the first time I did it, it was just a series of GPS points. And it's there's now a bit of a track going through there, but it is seriously remote sort of country. And in some cases, there will be no one within 100, 150, 200 Ks of where you're camped.
Wow.
It's seriously remote, and you've got to be pretty well prepared for something like that.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about some of the logistics that are involved in, in what you do and in what's a successful forward drive trip. But at least at the moment of this recording, we're on the eve of breaking out of lockdown. And even if we weren't, I know there's a lot of people, they look forward to their next holiday, jumping in their car, going off-road somewhere. What if we thought about the 5 biggest mistakes that families or individuals who own four-wheel drives make as they prepare to set out on a trip? What would they be?
Oh, yeah, I'll try and limit it to 5. But one of the big ones is not preparing the car properly for a trip like this. And it's as simple as getting it serviced before you go, just making sure everything is fixed. If there's a known problem, have it fixed before you go. Because I can assure you there's nothing worse than starting a trip, just getting half an hour down the road and suddenly a tyre blows or a fan belt goes or something like that. So prior preparation is absolutely key to that.
Yep. Well, if you're thinking of getting a service and you're listening to this in October 2021, you better book in now, because I think the mechanics are going to be pretty booked out for the next couple of months.
Yes, absolutely agree with that one. Yes. Tyres are the next one. Tyres are the sort of thing that can make or break a trip as well. If you've got, say, 10,000 K left on the tyres, change them before you go, particularly on the bigger trips.
Yes.
Because the times we have problems with tyres are always the ones that are almost worn out, where you just want to get that extra 5 to 10,000 out of them before you change them.
Mm-hmm.
Change them before you go.
Are some tyres better than others?
Yeah, definitely. And light truck tyres are the way to go for the outback trips and certainly any sort of four-wheel drive trip. And a light truck tyre just means it's physically stronger. It's got a lot more components within the construction of the tyre itself, and they just really make it easy for what you want to do. You can get very specific with tyres as well. Now, as a disclaimer, I am sponsored by Cooper Tyres. I've used them for 25 years, and I can honestly say I've never, ever had an issue with a tyre, not on my own vehicle.
Yeah.
You've got to choose the right tyre for what you want to do.
Yep. Okay, so we're up to 2. We've got a well-maintained car. We've just got it back from service. We've got good tyres with lots of Ks on it. What else do we need to think about?
Well, packing the car is another really important thing. And the biggest problem we see out on the trails is that people have overpacked. They've just simply taken too much stuff. You don't need 2 chairs for each person. You don't need 3 sets of cooking gear for every family. In fact, if you're on a group trip, you can get together and you may only need to take 1 stove for the entire group, or you might need to just take 1 sort of shelter instead of everybody having 1 shelter each. So overpacking is a really big thing. It adds weight. It adds sort of extra complications to the trip, which, the idea, you want to go out there and actually enjoy yourself. You don't want to be mucking around, spending hours setting up camp every night. So it's a fairly important one. Next one, number 4, food and supplies. You've got to really make sure you cater and plan out the what you actually want to eat and how much you take. We have had the situation where people have come out for a trip. We're 6 days into the desert, but they've only got 2 days worth of food and water. It's not a good thing. I mean, we always encourage people to carry emergency supplies. And on every trip I go on, I have 5 days food and water for 2 people. And that's the emergency stuff that will only get touched in the case of emergency.
Yep.
You've got to be aware of these things, because as long as you've got food and water, you can stay put for a long time before someone can come and rescue you.
Yeah. Have you seen this series on SBS, Alone?
I've seen some of that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but so we don't want to sort of jump in our car inspired by the Alone series and try and hunt kangaroo and goanna.
No. Now that's a whole nother story. Trying to survive out there. All the guides that I work with, we've all had survival training, and it's been a specialty I've explored over many years.
Okay.
But it's not something you can just jump into. You've got to plan things, and that's the secret, is planning, preparation.
Is there an online guide or a great book that kind of has it all there that you can get ready for the trip and a bit of a checklist?
There's many books out there. One of the best ones is, it's written by Vic Widman. He's the owner of Great Divide Tours, and this was basically commissioned by CSIRO as the definitive sort of driving guide. And there's lots of great information in that. It's basically just called 4-Wheel Drive Essentials.
Yes.
But it's a very, very good book, and just look up Great Divide Tours on the web, and you can get a copy of that.
Okay, fantastic. So we're up to fall. We've got a well-maintained car. We've got new tyres. We haven't overpacked. We've made sure we've got enough food and drink for the time that we're going to be gone. And what else?
Well, the last one's probably the most important, and unfortunately some people don't abide by this, but it's really, really important. If you've got kids, take them with you. Make sure they get that experience as well, because they'll learn so much more out driving around this fantastic country than they will anywhere else. And it's such a pity when some of the tours, we sit around the campfire and chat, and the clients say, "Oh yes, you have 3 kids at home. Johnny's 14, and young Mary's 12, and young Sarah's 6." So where are they? Why aren't they here? And it's such a pity.
Yeah, sitting on their tablets while mum and dad are out bush having a lot of fun.
That's exactly right. Yes, and unfortunately these days, there's whole generations out there now that they're born with a screen in their hand, basically, and they'd rather look at the sunset on the screen than a sunset in reality.
As I say, I'm not really into, I haven't been until this interview. I think things might change after today.
Excellent.
But I really love getting out back and adventuring as best I can, and going for long bushwalks and not having phone reception. What a wonderful freedom that is.
No, absolutely. But in saying that, though, the more remote you are, you still need some communication. So obviously mobile phones don't work out there. Handheld radios, they only basically have line of sight. So you've got to have something out there. And as a guide, as leading the tours, we always have sat phones available as well.
Okay.
So again, preparation, understanding that yes, accidents do happen, things do go wrong at times, but having that sort of communication, and particularly today, there's no reason why you can't. Very, very important.
Yes. Okay. So Great Divide Tours, you've given us the 5 tips if we were to sort of go out on our own, but a lot of people maybe will be going on their first trip, and they can do these tag-along tours where they go with an expert guide and they follow, and they can get help if, they break down, or if they don't know what to do, or they forgot to bring the Weet-Bix or something. So how do these tag-along tours work?
Well, the idea there is that we do all the planning of the trip. We book all the campsites. Sometimes we stay in motels here and there. We get all the permits to go into some of these areas, and sometimes you need 4 or 5 different permits, whether it's from the Central Land Council, whether it's Queensland National Parks, New South Wales National Parks. We do all that planning and all that preparation. The idea of that is that you can just join us. You bring your vehicle, your camp gear, and just if all you want to do is just follow along, that's it. The choice is to get as involved as much as you like, or as little as you like. We, as the guides, will carry all the heavy recovery gear. We've got contacts throughout the country if something goes astray. We all have medical training. We all have mechanical training. So we can get people out of trouble and to a point of safety. Takes a lot of the guesswork out of things, and it takes a lot of what we call what if. It takes a lot of the what if out of the equation.
Yes.
Yeah, there can be some very challenging times, but we haven't lost anybody yet, which is always a good thing.
Well, tell us about the challenging times and the most significant recoveries you've had to do. Have you got a couple of stories that come to mind?
Yeah, certainly. We've One time on the Madigan line, we took a little bit of a side trip down to what's called the geographic centre of Australia. We were on literally a goat track. There was half the time there was no track at all. So again, following GPS points.
Yeah. Which state are we in?
This one's in the Northern Territory at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Then from there, we needed to turn right somewhere along this track. And trying to find that particular point was quite a challenge because it's not marked on any maps. So we did turn off, and we then travelled. It took a day and a half to go 40 kilometres. It was first gear, low range, just idling along, and there was not one single flat spot on that entire journey.
Really? Wow.
All over little spinifex mounds. You can't do that now. They've stopped. You're not allowed to go off the tracks now, which is a good thing, I must admit.
Yes.
But we did have this opportunity. We did 40 Ks, yeah, and then right at the end of that, when we just started to turn around and come back, one of our crew had an extended mission patrol with a big camper trailer on the back, and all of a sudden, the suspension, everything just broke off the rear axle. So we were stuck, absolutely stuck.
Mm.
Now, fortunately, the client had some spare parts. I also happened to have a mechanic with me, and I had an engineer with me. We were very happy. So between the three of us and the spare parts, we took batteries out of cars. I have 12-volt welding equipment with me. We managed to repair the car enough that we could get it back onto the main track, which is another day and a half, and then another 6 days back into Birdsville. But it took us about 3 or 4 hours to repair this vehicle as well as we could. It was 44 degrees in the sun, not a lot of shade out there. But we managed to get it solved and get it back, and eventually got it back to Birdsville where we could put it on the hoist and do some more permanent repairs to it. But that was quite a challenge.
Yes. Wow.
But there was one worse than that.
Yeah.
And this was a case of, there's so many of these four-door utes around these days. They seem to be extremely popular, and most of them are pretty capable. But this was a case where one was absolutely overloaded, and they went over one too many sand dunes, and the whole chassis literally broke in half. So the car was just sitting there in a V shape with the middle of the car sitting on the sand. So what we were able to do there, we managed to salvage a bit of steel, a few plates from various places, borrowed them off other cars, and we managed again with the 12-volt welding, a couple of batteries, managed to get it back up to a point where we could actually drive that car out of the desert. Fairly extreme measures there, and unfortunately it doesn't happen very often, but yes, it does happen.
Yeah, wow. And your average punter's not carrying a welding kit in the back of the car, nor do they know how to use it.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. It's another skill that all the guides do, and we teach this actually in the advanced courses, how to do this. But again, it needs, yes, as you say, a lot of practice. And indeed, a lot of them, this is their first full drive as well, and this might be their first trip anywhere. So it's a really good sort of shakedown experience for them to actually understand how their car works, why it works, and just a lot of the little subtleties that come with four-wheel driving. So a lot of the skills are actually counterintuitive to how we're taught to drive in the cities.
And getting bogged or getting stuck, what are some of the most challenging environments that you've had to drive through, and where people typically will get bogged?
Without doubt, the worst place to get bogged is in the middle of some of the giant salt flats that are present in the desert. In the rare occasions where there is rain out through the deserts, they can be very shallow lakes. But they eventually dry out, and it's just a big open stretch of what looks like just salt. Yeah.
So if you crack that crust,
it's always wet, moist underneath, and it can be the mud can be six feet deep or more. And if you do crack through that crust, then you can sink down, and the car will actually sit on its belly. And then you've got the problem of suction as well. And the big problem in trying to recover this sort of situation is that maybe 400 or 500 metres to the edge of the salt pan. And there's no trees out there, so you've got to try and use whatever you can and improvise as some sort of anchor to try and get this car out of the situation.
Yeah.
The shovel is the greatest tool that you'll ever have out there.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do have to dig for quite a long time to actually break the suction and make some progress.
It's such an amazing continent we're on. Is there any other nation in the world that has the type of off-road trails that we do in Australia?
I've travelled a lot through Africa as well, and the African continent is very, very similar to Australia. Most experts consider Australia to be the harshest driving conditions in the world, and that's mainly because of just the variety of terrain that we have here. And you can be travelling for one day and go through a dozen different types of terrain, from mud to sand to sort of pure desert.
Mm.
It's very interesting around the place. I mean, I have driven a lot through Canada as well, through New Zealand, and as I said, Africa. But here, the variety is here in Australia.
As well as being behind the wheel of a car and going up and down and through stuff, is camping and just being in these places so vastly removed from any civilization. What is the experience like being like somewhere on the Canning Stock route or somewhere like that?
It's a really interesting situation. And at night, on a still night, it is deathly silent. There's not a breath of wind anywhere around. The stars go from horizon to horizon, and it's just such an interesting experience. And it's something you never really fully appreciate. You've got to be there, and you've got to experience it. But I could go back 1,000 times, and every experience would be different. Mm-hmm. It's such a fascinating place, and you never really know what's going to turn up at times. Now, I always use a swag when I'm out there, and at one particular time, I just woke up in the middle of the night for some unknown reason and opened the swag up, and about 6 inches above my head was a camel. So experiences like that are just they're out of this world. Could have been an alien, could have been anything.
Well, some people listening to this might be thinking, well, I'd never sleep in a swag if I'm going to wake up and find a camel 6 inches from my face. But I guess the beauty of a swag is there's just nothing separating you from the stars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always take binoculars with me as well, and I love stargazing. And more than one time, I've woken up with a set of binoculars under my head somewhere, and you go to sleep watching the stars, and there's just so many of them. I live in Sydney. You look at the sky at night, and there's plenty of stars there, but it's probably 1% of the stars you see out in the middle of the desert. Mm-hmm. There's just so many out there. There's no light pollution, and it's just a really fantastic experience.
Mm-hmm. And is there any way, do you connect with Indigenous people in any of these travels? It's important to honour our First Nations peoples and the way that they've marked out the land in different ways, and different places are of significance. How do you go about that whole connection?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, their knowledge of the land is just absolutely phenomenal. It's so intrinsic with just the lifestyle and just the land. They say they belong to the land doesn't belong to them, and you talk to them and you can really understand the relationship they have with the land. On quite a few of the tours, and particularly up around Arnhem Land, yes, we get involved with the locals up there. we've been going up there for a long time now, and we actually get invited back. So we actually can get in and see some of the areas that they're willing to show us.
Yes.
It's a real privilege. One of the trips up through the Hay River section, which is the northern part of the Simpson again, there's an Aboriginal camp there called Batten Hill, and they take you on a bush tucker tour, and this particular experience just astounded me. The older gentleman there, who's no longer alive, unfortunately, so I won't mention his name, but he picked this, what he called a bush tomato, and it was just a vine with it almost looked like a bit of a choco, but he picked it, pulled it apart, and gave us all a bit of a taste. It didn't taste like much at all, but it was full of vitamins and minerals. But then he said, "Now you see that other one that was right next to the one I picked? To me, it looked identical."
Yes.
And he just said, "If you eat that, you'd be dead in about 5 minutes." 2 vines to me looked identical, side by side. He picked one. He'd know, he can identify which one it is. But that's the sort of the depth of knowledge of the land that they've got. And just as we were walking past, he'd pull off a leaf off a tree and say, "Here, this is soap bush. This is what you wash your hands with. This is a medicine one. If you get a blister, you put this on here." It's just astounding. And unfortunately, a lot of the city folk, they'll go out there and they just look around and say, "Oh, there's nothing here. It's just a barren wasteland." So far from the truth.
Well, all these questions are, without notice. So it's beautiful to hear your responses, and great to hear that you've got that respect and that connection as I anticipated you might. So that's wonderful. Look, it'd take a long time to get from here to Arnhem Land, and then when you get there, you're driving through. How long would those trips be?
The Arnhem Land trip's about 15 days or so. We meet. The idea of these trips is we'll meet you, most of the way up there. So in this case, we meet you in Catherine and then go from there.
So you got 1-day trips, 3-day trips, 3-week trips, summer, winter, autumn, spring?
Or yes, all year round when we're allowed to.
Yeah.
But yes, no, we have a Christmas in July down through the snowies there.
Oh.
Yes, you run trips through the Victorian high country over the Christmas New Year break. Most of the bigger trips through the outback are all through the winter time. It's just simply too hot, and a lot of the places are closed during the summertime.
Yep.
But no, Tasmania, New Zealand, yes, they're accessible, a lot of the time of the year. Absolutely.
Oh, New Zealand as well. Awesome.
Yep.
Ian, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure people will have enjoyed this.
No, my absolute pleasure.